If you were to run a large-scale poll asking what the worst sequel in video game history was, then I'd be willing to bet a large sum of money that a sizable chunk of the votes would go to Devil May Cry 2. There have been some truly awful sequels in video game history, but in terms of infamy, in terms of the sheer effect they've had on their franchise and the notoriety of their failure, none come to mind as quickly as this game. Honestly, if there's one thing you even know about Devil May Cry, it's either Bury the Light, the darn lawn chair, or Disaster of the second entry. It's that infamous. Of course, when choosing to go into the series for reviews, I knew this. I knew that the game had such a nasty reputation. That said, in my DMC1 review, I described my outlook to essentially be cautiously optimistic. That was because this isn't my first time playing a game in due part due to a scathing online presence. I first played Sonic 06 due to how much I'd heard of it being bad. Don't get me wrong, the game is really bad, but it had just enough good aspects I was able to latch on to and walk away from the game saying I found it by no means good, but personally enjoyable, a guilty pleasure if you will. I bring this story up because who's to say the same can't happen here. DMC2 is an infamously horrible game, but I've largely kept myself in the dark as to why that is. Keep in mind I'm not going in completely blind. However, I still want to go in for myself and see, as an established and unbiased newcomer playing these games for the first time, and as someone who recently played and loved the first game, is Devil May Cry 2 really as bad as the past 21 years of criticism made it out to be? That is the mindset I went into this game with. I'll say it right now, it was very different from the mindset I had coming out. Back on the HD collection, and this game came out on PS2 on 2 discs initially, one for Dante and one for the new playable character Lucia. Naturally I started with Dante, but I did finish both of these for the review. The game has a longer intro sequence before the title screen. Most of it's gameplay footage, but it's meant to show off more of the cool new stuff Dante can do in this game. Kinda feels more like a trailer than intro, but it still suffices. The game opens with a narrator explaining how Sparda was, in fact, a pretty cool guy, and his legend now continues with his son. Lucia gets attacked by birds, and continuing the trend of characters falling out of the sky at the start of these games, Dante decides his best entry to be the window on the roof. The opening here is actually pretty cool and comparable to the original in a lot of ways in terms of making an exciting opening. I don't like it as much, but it's still a good way to start. Lucia directs Dante to the Vide Marly Island where he meets Matiere, who is actually part of the tribes that Sparda fought alongside many years ago. She explains how corporation owner Arius has been using demon power to make the island a place for underworld power. That's a really funny thought to me until you realize that a popular CEO being a demon king is actually pretty accurate to the world we live in. She said if Dante stops the man, then she will tell him a story of Sparda from the past. Dante chooses to place that on a coin flip. It'll make sense why he does this later, but it still feels pretty dumb and out of character even. He does this multiple times throughout the game as well. That right there is the last bit of story until like halfway through the game. This game has a lower emphasis on story than even the first game. At least in that one there were storyline setup or even just dialogue to let you get to know the characters. I don't think a single genuine cutscene in this game plays for more than 30 seconds from the end of mission 1 through the end of mission 9, which is the halfway point of the game. That's also when we first meet Arius, and he and Dante barely even speak a word to each other. They use this scene to set up Bulwark as a rival to Dante, but they also never speak to each other. Granted, Virgil, or Nello Angelo if you want to be specific, in the first game also didn't speak once. The difference is he was still intimidating and Dante had an emotional reaction to his presence. There was very clearly something separating him from the other boss characters. However, in this game, where Dante has no reaction to Bulwark nor any of the other bosses in the first half, he kinda just ends up being a part of the random pile of guys who show up, get defeated, and then move on without thinking about it. This story is just so in one ear and out the other, and I think Bulwark is the most exemplary as to how. Things just happen and don't matter in the slightest, going through the motions at its finest. Lucia also finds Arius here in the exact same place in the exact same way, which means he had to go through the commitment of after Lucia comes, landing the helicopter, coming out, and then going back up, and then coming back down the same way when Dante came. He even moves the exact way both times. He's dedicated to presenting himself the same way to both characters. Good on him, I guess. These campaigns try to act like they're both parallel and standalone, which ends up making everything more confusing. While invading Arius' fortress, Lucia hands Dante some things meant for Latier.
It seems you have obtained the final arcana.
Wait, we were collecting arcanas this whole time? Thou art I, and I am thou. When you play Lucia's disc, you find out that she had been trying to collect these arcanas because they're crucial to stopping Arius. I'm glad that wasn't considered an important enough plot detail to keep in Dante's story. Dante goes to fight Arius, and again with the crucifixion in the series. Dante surprisingly hands over the Arcanas and just says he'd rather get rid of Arius the old-fashioned way. Lucia says that she was created by Arius and wants Dante to continue without her. Arius told her name is actually Chi, with this freaking Kingdom Hearts crap, and she was made by him, therefore she will inevitably turn on humans eventually. Lucia is mildly distraught as Arius talks about how he will use his power to become immortal and transform into Arius alto saxophone or something like that. As it turns out, after a few filler missions climbing back up to Arius, he didn't actually have the Fortune Arcana. The coin Dante had actually swapped out with his own.
A false coin for a false god.
That's pretty cool, actually. And speaking of the few cool things Dante does in this game...
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
Back on the ground, Lucia tells Dante to kill her, making the grand reveal that she was created by Arius. Didn't she already say that? Then she starts crying, and as Dante knows, devils never cry. They should make a song about that. Also, isn't this the exact same arc as Trish's in the last game? Dante goes to defeat the final boss in the Underworld, despite being told he may not come back. By this point, I had completely forgotten about the promise that he'd be told a story about Sparta, so when Lucia brought it up as a reason for Dante to stay, I was really confused, but that's on me. Dante says he actually already knows the story. Sparta did the same thing. In terms of genuine character moments, I'd say this is the highlight. He knows his family history, and so he already knows what he needs to do. Meanwhile, Arius does manage to turn into Arius alto saxophone, who Lucia manages to defeat. Dante shoots the evil thing in the underworld for a bit, then shoots the fire human who comes out of it. The game inexplicably cuts to him on a motorcycle, and he's all like, yeah. That's the note his story ends on. That's the freaking story. Not entirely, actually. Lucia's story ends with her at the shop saying that Sparta returned when he did the same thing. She also finds out that Dante's coin was double-sided, not only meaning that he never put whether or not he'd save anyone up to chance, but also at the end when he put who would go onto the underworld on a coin flip, he was guaranteeing Lucia would stay safe. Someone then knocks on the door before the game cuts away. I guess we're supposed to infer that it's Dante, but it very well could have been Trish wondering who this woman in the shop is and wondering why she wasn't invited. I already said it, but this story feels inconsequential. We could have skipped this and missed nothing. Part of that is because the characters and dialogue are so dry. Dante hardly acts like he did in the first game. He's no longer any degree of witty and fun. He seems incredibly apathetic, actually. The 3 cool things I pointed out are the only cool things he does in the entire game. Unless you count the time I did this. That was pretty sick, actually. The one thing he keeps that I appreciate is his genuine sense of goodwill. There's actually a theory that tries to explain why he seems so out of it in this game, saying that he's depressed after having killed Virgil in the first game. Viewing his character through that lens makes more sense, but I never really got the idea that he was depressed while playing, just bored. Lucia and Matiere are hardly even characters. They have this moment where Matiere says that even though Lucia is a creation of Arius, she's still her daughter. That goes nowhere, it's only relegated to one scene, but it's something. That scene aside, they're boring. Arius was actually the highlight, but only at the end of Dante's story. He gets super wacky. The voice direction is awful and to his benefit. Every other time you see him, he talks in a deep, boring voice that tries to be intimidating. Besides him, the whole story is completely nothing. Even though the first game had very little story, it was at least memorable. Devil May Cry 2 is anything but memorable. I didn't even feel the need to splice story bits throughout different parts of the review because there really was no point. There's so little worthwhile that if I didn't have to review the game, it would have escaped my mind the first chance it got. And now moving on to the gameplay, let's start with the positives. They made the exact control changes I envisioned, actually. Wait, where's Control Style B? Where'd it go? I left it here in April, where did it go? Putting aside the saddest options menu I've seen in a good while, I was able to adjust to the sword being on Y. There's now a dodge roll on B, meaning that you don't need to lock stance to dodge, and you can now dodge in any direction. Excellent change. Dodging at the right time even contributes to your combo style gauge. The window is a bit too generous at times, both in terms of space and timing, sometimes crossing the border into being comical, but it still feels good to use correctly. Yellow orbs are gone. Yes! You can now practice as much as you need without worrying about getting set back. In their place are gold orbs, bringing you back to life when you die. They're a great incentive for what little genuine exploration there is, and they're a much better alternative to lives. I wish you could choose when they got used, but it's still more than good enough for what little this game asks of you. The structure was changed, and I genuinely do like what they did with it. The first game had a large connected map, and each mission would kind of direct you to a certain area and give you an objective there. By comparison, this game is more level to level, with each mission having its own contained area to traverse. This, in theory, keeps the pacing moving forward and gives more location variety. In general, there is still room for exploration into level design without needing a connected map. I don't think this game in particular really does the most it could have with it, but this could be a beneficial direction if used properly in future games. I mean, hey, I'm trying to stay positive right now. Dante's starting moveset is pretty well rounded. He has a few sword combos to pull from, the Helm Splitter and High Time are back, and add a Stinger as a part of his base kit alongside the double jump. Dante of course has some new tricks too. You can now do air kicks, giving Dante some semblance of an aerial combo game, unfortunately just not that useful. But with guns that come in pairs, namely Ebony and Ivory, he can shoot on both sides if there are surrounding enemies. I didn't use this often, although I see the vision behind this. Similarly, you can shoot straight downward from a double jump. Another cool idea, harmed by the fact that if you shoot relatively soon after a second jump, then you will automatically shoot down regardless of what you're aiming at. You have to wait before continuing to shoot, which feels awkward due to how the jump shot feels. Listen, I'm getting an A in physics and I could absolutely not tell you what's going on here. All I can tell you is that it looks and feels goofy. Final new addition, you can wall run by rolling into a wall. I, once again, get the vision, but this one is the most problematic of all. If you dodge relatively close to a wall, you'll likely stick to it and jump off of it, which can cause issues. The new moves Dante has have good ideas behind them, but are varying degrees of problematic. And that's Dante's full moveset for the whole game. You cannot buy new moves from the shop for either Dante or any of his weapons. Everything Dante can do from the start is the exact same he can do at the end. The near absence of any sort of progression contributes to the game's biggest issue. The combat isn't fun. The new combo system not only makes no sense, but also is less enjoyable. Instead of timing your button presses, you now move the left stick during your combo to get new moves. There's nothing to intuit this, I only knew because I had heard beforehand, and it also messes with how your movement buffers into your combos. If you actually want to use different finishers, you have to begin combos from a standstill. One interesting innovation with the combat is that you can actually get completely different combos during Devil Trigger. The Million Stab one in particular is a really cool one, and it gives more reason to try melee and DT, at least in theory. Regardless of that, the timing element being gone causes an interesting consequence. You can now just mash Y and things will work out just fine since you don't have to worry about when you press the button. That's also because the enemies hardly try to hit you at points. I do think it's fine if they want to try a different approach to the timing system in the first game, and this method, if expanded upon, could be very interesting. What if, instead of just moving the stick, you had to do some sort of input with the stick that correlate to the combo? For instance, to use the circle attack, just move the stick in a circle mid-combo. For the down-up swing, flick the stick forward then back. Something similar to fighting game special move inputs. Changes like these would make the combat more engaging and make it less rigid, letting you use these moves regardless of where in the combo you are. The Stinger also feels much worse to use. It looks and feels limp and sad. It's nowhere near the movement and approach option it used to be, although being an approach option that hits knockdown opponents gives it some utility that still makes it the best sword move in Dante's arsenal. Don't expect the new melee weapons you get to add any variety to combat. You get 2 new swords. You start with Rebellion, then get Vendetta, and finally Merciless. The grand difference between these 3 is that Vendetta has slightly shorter range, slightly higher damage, Merciless is the opposite, and Rebellion is middle ground. That's it. They all have the same combos and the same questionable feel. You can spend red orbs on upgrading them, although I never really felt the difference in damage. Even if it did give a tangible effect, it is by no means a suitable replacement to unlocking new moves. Same principles of upgrading applies for the guns, of which there are quite a few. The shotgun returns, having a huge damage output even at range. The missile launcher does quite a bit of damage but feels like garbage to use. There's no feeling of impact and it's exceptionally slow with no way to speed it up. Finally, there are some SMGs which do great rapid fire damage. You can also quick swap guns with LT, which is great, although I didn't use the other guns much because Ebony and Ivory got a massive buff and now completely break the combat system. Final thing about swords I forgot to mention, their damage output is really bad regardless of what kind of special combo you try to use. In comparison, guns were given real-life accurate power. Shooting enemies with the handguns is less risky, has higher DPS, and is now able to hard knock down enemies and even juggle them upwards all on their own. You can just mash X and send an enemy halfway to heaven. The game tried showing off some new threatening enemies, and as soon as I was able to kill them by shooting them without any threat to my safety, I had to ask, is this okay? The game breaks every risk-reward rule in the book, less risk is rewarded infinitely more, because the swords hardly even stagger enemies half the time with the exception of the Stinger. And again, the enemies hardly even try to fight back, they're closer to giving you a firm handshake than a firm beatdown. This game is incredibly easy because nothing is really a threat to you. You can shoot any enemy that gets in the way, but that's not even necessary most of the time because there's very little stopping you from ignoring enemies entirely. These enemies are complete damage sponges. You can wail on them for a full minute before they die, and many don't even have a chance to fight back. As soon as they're knocked down, they won't be getting back up anytime soon. There's no reason to even try that hard to combat, because even for S-rank combos, the game doesn't ask very much of you. As soon as the enemy is down, you can hit him with the Stinger repeatedly, which is optimal because it gives you the most style points. If your meter is running out, you can simply roll to sustain it, or you can just shoot someone and get it all back immediately. This style system is broken. It can be somewhat fun to hold an S-rank combo for a long time or even get multiple in a single combat, but it gets old after a while because there's no way in which it expands. You get no new tools to increase the complexity, and each encounter feels the same. The enemy variety is really low, many are functionally similar and they all go down nearly the same way. The only difference from many later game enemies is that they stagger less. Since the enemy telegraphs range from vague to non-existent, that just means the safest way to beat them is to shoot them, because going close to them only invites them to hitting you out of whatever fancy sword shenanigans you try. This applies heavily to the boss fights, which are so underwhelming. In all fairness, the fact that bosses get repeated less is an honest-to-god improvement. All the bosses have some combination of the issues with the enemies. The telegraphs are poorly conveyed, they hardly react to you hitting them, they reward passive strategies way too much, and they can take forever to kill. The gorilla is probably the best fight, but that's not saying much since he's still not a great fight. He attacks so high that he can barely touch you, and as soon as you activate DT and shoot him, he just melts. The buff to firing rate in DT does way too much damage to so many of these bosses. The squid thing soon after was so annoying. The tentacles convey no sense of harmful momentum half the time, and you'll get hit without even feeling like it should have done damage. He also spews poison that makes it impossible to focus on the head even in DT, which is the only part that actually matters since the tentacles grow back really soon after you kill them. He also takes advantage of one of this game's biggest issues, the auto lock. The first game would have you invisibly lock onto nearby enemies or objects, usually when you're really close to them. That only caused issues once or twice, but in this game they made it worse. You'll target whatever enemy it feels like, regardless of whether or not they're even on screen. If you attack, you'll not only automatically face the direction, but also lunge towards it. The only way to stop it is to hold RT, which you're never told. It's not even on the controls anywhere as far as I'm aware. Something as simple as hitting these orbs to progress is now a needless chore as Dante flings himself towards the enemies you don't want to fight. So when fighting the octopus, you either have to run in to hard lock on the head, or waste time shooting down the regenerating tentacles. Actually, most bosses have some form of infinitely respawning enemies in them, which further exacerbates the issue. The ball and chain guy is also such a pain, but for a completely new reason. While I do like the new combat animations for the sword, I do think they look pretty cool, they are really sluggish and uncancelable. This means that if you want to go melee against this guy for the few attacks that are well telegraphed, you can't even dodge out of the way in time because Dante has to stop and put his sword away before you can move. That's another reason mindlessly mashing is more effective than using real combos. Mashing gives you shorter combos so you can get to the finisher quicker, which are the attacks that have the least amount of end lag. Either way, go sit in the corner and hold shots on him since guns have less lag and you can actually reasonably dodge some of the attacks from a distance. He occasionally starts blocking shots, so this fight takes forever no matter what way you slice it. Bulwark's fights are pure nothing. The most difficult part though is that his wolves are there in the second fight. These guys jump around the room, often from off screen, and I cannot stress enough, do not react to your attacks. There's something in between having enemies drop from your weakest attack and not having them flinch regardless of whatever you do to them. You can justify the lack of stagger when it's a big slow enemy, but if the enemy is small and attacks within frames, then they need to show some kind of response to damage for it to feel any degree of fair or justified. There's no point in even trying to do anything remotely interesting with the combat system against bosses, or even in general for that matter, because there's almost nothing you can do to stop enemies from smacking you right back out of it when applicable. Therefore, there's no reason to actually fight from a range not suitable for social distancing, which is the strategy the game rewards most, mind you. That's why saying that range is only an option and you're not forced to choose is a flawed argument. Playing with guns is boring, and without them is irritating. On a slightly more positive note, the second phase of the building fight reminded me of Griffin from the first game, except if he was worse. This actually would have been a cool fight in the first game. The first phase, I have no comment. It's so nothing. Phantom shows up, now with all the flaws of a DMC2 boss. You can't even reliably jump attack him anymore. Combine that with his attacks that were unnecessarily sped up, his health bar which was unnecessarily inflated, and his block stance, and you have another unfun fight that takes way too long. Trismagia is so horribly designed. When split, her individual heads take next to no damage. Her phases of sitting in the background and her transformations take way too long, and her attacks cover such questionable areas. The game has awful depth perception, which makes it impossible to tell where in the arena her attacks are actually affecting. Arius is also trash. His attacks are unnaturally fast, but also surprisingly strong. The enemies are everywhere, which distract you as he teleports and attacks from off-screen. This takes advantage of the horrible camera. The camera was my absolute biggest problem with the first game, and this game somehow made it even worse. The camera is never focused. Important details will be hidden by an angle that the camera will never go in, so when you're trying to find Arius in his massive room, there's no choice but to run around the entire scene trying to find him. That's not even the biggest issue with the camera. In most games, you can rely on the fact that your character will consistently be near the center of the screen, or at least taking up a significant portion that keeps them in focus. This game just loves putting you at the edge of the screen constantly and for no reason. Sometimes it's in a failed attempt to keep the enemies on screen, but you will have outrun them and the camera will never recenter on you. Sometimes it even feels like it hit a non-existent border by outrunning the screen. The fight that uses this in the worst way is the infested chopper. You're at the edge of the screen because the chopper is always in the corner, so the game's desperately trying to split the difference. Their shots and missiles usually end up coming from the very edge of the screen. In the missile's case, right behind you, at the edge of the camera. Meanwhile, you can't even think about using any sort of melee to speed up a little bit. Issues like these are minor annoyances in a vacuum, especially due to how easy the game is overall, but when all strung together, it's an obnoxious nightmare that makes any positive I could have given to combat null after only a few missions, and it's not even accounting for the ranking system. Again, credit where it's due. I like that this game gives you the criteria you're being graded on and how well you did on each individual one before giving you your final rank. The clarification is appreciated, and the ranking system is still a good idea. It's just that I feel I could go for the higher ranks in the first game, and it'd be hard, but mostly fair. In this game, I feel it'd just be a more annoying way to play an already annoying game. The final boss is a cluster of all the other bosses throughout the game. At least there's some payoff for them appearing. Most of these guys, I don't even know why we fought them to begin with, other than them being in the way, I guess. As soon as you destroy the first portion of it, you can either use the limited space allotted to dodge their frequent attacks that will start overlapping if you get too close to another, or you can shoot at the very edge of their range, in some cases even outside their range. This is the final boss, and it takes so long and requires such little effort. I was able to play the game in one hand and write a note into my document with the other. I also hope you don't die figuring out his attack ranges because you're restarting the entire thing. I just bought Vital Stars and Devil Stars to do this practically without thinking. Same goes for the second phase, the Despair Embodied, and even Lucia's final boss, Arius Alto Saxophone. I genuinely wrote that as a joke initially, but then forgot his name. I'm not going back and checking, it doesn't matter. Just use a Devil Star when you run out of DT and he'll be out easily, just like the other final bosses. How's the mission design then? Freaking sucks, thanks for asking. I'll be honest, I like the first 2 or 3 missions. It's when you're progressively figuring out the combat and before the repetition sets in. These early missions generally have the least problems with them. Mission 3 had the questionable fire spouts, but was also quick and had a relatively decent boss. Afterwards, the problems become incredibly evident. Exploration is hardly a factor anymore. There are so few blue orb fragments lying around anymore. The game itself considers it an achievement to get 12 of these. So really, the only way you're going to be getting blue orbs, and purple orbs for that matter, is through the shop, just like everything else. Despite many of these areas being so big, they're mostly large just for the sake of it. Very rarely is stuff hidden into corners or anywhere creative. Secret missions still exist, but this game's definition of a secret is a door that's blatantly in the way, and the secret missions themselves are just a few waves of enemies. For the record, I don't mind the fact that the weapons and hearts are in more obvious locations. In fact, let's talk about the hearts. One of the few things with a semblance of exploration, and in fact one of the most interesting things about the game, your Devil Trigger has an amulet attached. This amulet has room for 3 hearts. You can find these hearts throughout the missions. Mostly they're behind a brief puzzle or are somewhat hidden after a combat room. The disappointing thing about these hearts is that they just tend to be things that DT could already do in the first game. The Quick Heart, Life Heart, and Lightning Hearts are all just things that it had pre-installed before. The Damage Heart is technically the same, except I'm pretty sure it has a slight damage increase anyway, although I guess the extra damage on top of that only really hurts the enemies. The Aerial Heart is pretty cool though. It gives DT some extra utility for platforming and flying fights. I didn't get the Chrono Heart because I didn't know how to damage well-placed conspicuous lump over here. The Ice Heart, which Lucia starts with, is the only semi-reliable way to stun enemies and certain bosses, so I really liked having it around. But back to the prior point of exploration, I really liked exploring in the first game, and I feel the linear structure didn't need to limit it. There are times where that's evident, but other times the game just gives you large areas with nothing in them. Being more linear, you'd probably expect the game to be more focused, but it's not. There's so much dead air, either walking through empty areas or, my favorite part of the game, waiting on slow-moving elevators. This game is great. Once again, despite the linearity, this game somehow has worse player guidance. In the first game, you could open the map and it'd mark where you need to go. This game has a map, but it doesn't even show where you yourself are, let alone where you're supposed to be going. It's also not very often exactly clear what you're supposed to be doing or how it affects progression. And that's it. I guess I can't avoid the subject any further. Mission 5 is infamous for being one of, if not the worst mission in the whole series, and I can't say it's undeserved. It begins with a horrible encounter with the wolves, and then you refight the monkey. I assume it's supposed to be tough, maybe even optional, but the fire rate increase and damage increase in DT makes it completely melt without a second thought. Then you have to kill these tanks. You can hit them from the tops for a little extra damage, but that's also where their attacks come from. So the best way to beat them is this. You have to do this 4 times. You then inexplicably have to go back to where you came afterwards, which, without explaining anything, initiates a chase scene. The chopper has a health bar, but killing it does nothing. You'd think it would, given that it's attacking you and that you're auto-targeting it. You instead have to platform around this tower. The jump still feels unnatural, and like I said, the depth perception is completely useless. This game attempts platforming a lot more, and it still doesn't feel good because of how awkward and committed the jump arc is. I like the idea of scaling up the inside and outside of buildings, but that's all the credit I can give it because the execution isn't good. You then actually fight the chopper, which again isn't fun. That was a really bad mission, but it isn't even my least favorite in the whole game. When it comes to player guidance issues and just design overall, that goes to Mission 9. This one puts you on a time limit to backtrack through the areas you just went through in the prior mission. You have to go back up these stairs, which is just so riveting. Then you get out here. The game shows you the door, but you go up to it and it's locked. To unlock it, you have to hit these orbs scattered around the room. Not only does the game not tell you this, the camera also never shows you the darn things unless you're right next to them. They're hidden amongst the red fog, and they're right next to enemies that make them near impossible to hit. And this was, by the way, before I learned how to unlock enemies, so this was especially painful. Then you get out to see this plane. The surroundings room led to the dead end, and there's nothing you can do with the plane. You have to go through a hole in the broken turbine that the game will just straight up never show you. No camera angle in this entire room tells you that there's any sort of hole even there. Yes, I looked this up, and yes, without shame. Those are the 2 worst missions, but I'll be honest, none of the others were even that fun after Mission 3. Mission 10 takes you to this worm dimension with an obnoxious boss fight and even more annoying worm enemies that take way too long to kill. They also eat you with their greatly questionable hitboxes, just meaning you have to button mash out and re-fight them. That just makes the whole thing take even longer. Mission 14 has you look around this town for orbs, and if you don't know how to unlock now, you'll need to figure it out here. Otherwise, you're not making it anywhere as the auto-lock continually switches targets on you. Once you get them after a great battle with the camera, you have to go to a door that you definitely didn't see in this area prior. You know, I'm sensing a running theme with the worst missions in this game. Having a sluggish feeling combat system, a camera that refuses to show you anything important, unintuitive progression, bad pacing, bad bosses, and having it all take way longer than necessary in nearly every single mission makes for a miserable experience. Anyways, there's still the Lucia disc to check out, and get this, it's a slightly retooled Dante campaign, except somehow worse. Lucia plays very similarly to Dante. Honestly, I found some aspects of how she plays to be even better. Her combos are longer, faster, and look cooler, but suffer from the same sluggishness and end lag as Dante's. In fact, she has it worse due to the feel of her combat. Pressing the button once usually has Lucia throw out 2 attacks, so there's really no telling where in the combo you are to throw in a stick movement or to try and roll away. In an attempt to make her feel different, they gave her different rolls, with her side roll being pitifully useless. You get no distance to actually dodge with. Instead of the Stinger, she has a flip that functions the same, except without any of the range and utility that made the Stinger worth using to begin with. although it does keep the same looping, stun, and style properties. Combine that with her moves being functionally worse versions of Dante's moves, and the repetition is stronger here than ever before. Throwing knives are the same as Ebony and Ivory, and this kick is just a laggier high time. Her alternate weapons are a bomb that is one of the most ineffective attacks in a video game I've ever seen. I actually sat here for a good while trying to find out how they worked or how they'd be useful, which I never did. These needles are a slow spread shot, and the bowgun is only available underwater. Most of Lucia's missions are just variations of Dante's missions. Do mission 1 except backwards, or do mission 5 but it gets cut off early. Or even do mission 14 except the orbs are in even dumber locations. She has fewer missions overall, and even a few original missions, most of which taking place underwater. Now if the first game had decently functional underwater handling, this game is well beneath that glowing statement. Instead of controlling like Mario 64, it controls like Mario 1, but worse. You can try to use melee attacks, but the delay is so bad. There's no way they made it like this and thought by any means that this was okay. Your main source of combat will either be the cranky bombs, no they won't, or holding down the bowgun. You have to fight an entire boss like this. Realistically, the fight is just waiting for him to become visible and then gunning him down, just like most of your problems in this game. I'll be honest man, playing this whole disc in one session kind of broke me. I have never held a dreary-eyed, mouth half-open stare of utter apathy followed by indescribable noises of confusion and frustration before. This puzzle to get the quick heart was somehow one of the most obnoxious things I've ever done. You can't lock onto the orb, so you'll end up shifting to the side of them mid-combo. They don't have health bars, so you have no clue when they're going to be destroyed, and you have no clue when they're about to regenerate. How this was so painful to me, I don't freaking know. You know what? Actually I do, because everything surrounding this was near equally awful and aggravating me in their own special way, making this worse by extension. The best compliment I can give it is that it's short. That goes for the whole game, actually. Dante's disc took me just over 3 hours, and Lucia's took me 2. Wait a second, what is this brand promotion? I've never heard of Diesel before playing this game. Dating myself in 2 reviews in a row, I'm aware. But hey, I guess it worked. I looked into this brand after seeing this. I wasn't expecting product placement like this. It's not even that bad, but it's honestly hilarious. Alright, granted, that playtime is not counting the times I paused to look up something stupid, but is counting the times where I didn't pause but was still looking up something stupid. Still, very short, which begs the question, why are these on 2 separate discs? They could have easily fit onto one. Did they try to make the game seem bigger than it really is? I'm honestly kind of glad it wasn't longer though. That near 5.5 hours of total playtime seemed closer to 10 2/3, and this is by no means a compliment. There's still a hard mode for both campaigns, maybe it fixes the balance, but also maybe it's just more annoying. I feel like upping the difficulty alone wouldn't work. You'd need to completely rebalance and restructure the combat and enemies for this to be fun in my opinion. You can still unlock the must-die difficulty for both as well, which I'm sure is as pleasant as paying someone to shovel assorted spices into your eyes. For beating both campaigns once, you unlock the Bloody Palace. I didn't bother. It's just more floors of enemies. It's honestly questionable if this would even be my thing in a good game, let alone this one. None of that really matters though, because for beating Dante's campaign on hard, you get playable Trish to use over Lucia. And this is just one of the biggest insults of all. Trish plays just as Dante did in the first game. This isn't something that would magically fix all of, realistically, many of the game's problems, but they had the better game feel to work with and chose to bar it off. Man, I didn't mean to do all the gameplay stuff at once, but now we're finally moving on to presentation. The game looks rough. Aesthetically, the biggest compliment I could give this game is that I really like Dante's new design. I already complimented the combat animations and it works perfectly along with that design. The rest of the game looks bad. I'll just say it looks really bad. The textures are nowhere near the well-made and detailed qualities I would have expected, not just coming out the first game, but also in general from the era. They look muddy and sometimes kind of blurry, and so what the first game did that looked impressive for an early PS2 game has been downgraded to just being underwhelming at best. The video file issue was even made a bit worse. There are these new transitions when grabbing items that should look pretty smooth, but instead are honestly kind of hilarious. These cutscenes are in widescreen though. They look like garbage, but they sure did get upscaled. The rough visuals contribute to the lack of any real atmosphere. Everything in this game looks and feels drab, but it never really felt intentional. Part of that is due to the soundtrack. The atmospheric tracks are kinda just droning. The action tracks are a bit more prevalent, they get some more techno and electronic in there for the chase, battle, and boss themes. The issue is that they weren't really all that memorable, even though I did like them. The music is just kinda worse across the board. And that's not even getting to my complaints with the sound design. On its own, the game has good sound design. The issue is that the audio mixing has been thrown off wildly in some instances, especially the bullets. The sounds start overlapping and adding onto each other at points. It's worst typically with DT bullets and the SMGs at their high firing rate, combined with the noises of impact and the enemies. At times it just sounds straight up broken. It's amazing that this whole game is an overall downgrade. It does literally everything worse than the first game did. Sometimes you'll hear reviewers make seemingly exaggerated statements about certain games, but I swear I genuinely mean it. This is the kind of sequel that makes you question if you actually like the first game or not. It's the kind of game that makes you question why you even play or review games. Part of that's because it feels like it's trying to be a faithful sequel. It fails, but the ideas are there, from the attempted atmosphere to the way it presents its combat and story. In general, I see a lot of comparisons between this game and Mega Man X, another disastrous sequel made by Capcom in 2003. Between these two, it's hard to say which is worse, but right now, I think I hate this game even more. After looking into development, I quickly realized what the issue was. I was able to see what happened to this game for it to turn out the way it did. It honestly made so much more sense after looking into it. Capcom was having a restructuring. They were split into an arcade and a console division. Due to the waning arcade markets and the insane success of the PS2, they shifted a lot more to the console market. When Team Little Devils, the development team for the first game, got a sequel greenlit, they were strangely chosen not to be the sole developers. Capcom wanted a sequel fast and handed development over to Capcom Production Studio 1, an arcade center production team that had many work on fighting games prior. Looking at their prior work to DMC2, they made a lot of acclaimed games. Capcom vs. SNK, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and apparently the GBA port of A Link to the Past. What this list tells me is that they had a talent for what they did, but it was far removed from what this project demanded. Granted, some new team members were shared between the two groups, but the director was gone, having been assigned to a different game, and one of the producers, to be clear, no disrespect to him for his job, but he didn't seem to really understand the appeal of Dante as a character. They actively disliked Dante's attitude and wanted to be toned down. They saw that as a problem. The developers eventually realized Dante was just boring, but when they tried to fix it, it was too late. The writer they got was busy due to being a novelist and couldn't even attempt changes until the translation had already started. Even that aside, development seemed scatterbrained, with the developers not really wanting to iterate on the ideas of the first game, but also not having a well-defined idea to work with. They wanted something bigger, they wanted something more linear, they wanted something easier, and they wanted playable Trish. That's not enough of a direction for a game like this. Development ended up stalling because of the team not having any experience with creating 3D action games and having to balance learning with handling other projects. Eventually the director was changed to Hideki Utsuno after he finished SNK vs. Capcom 2, chosen to help get the project back on track, 6 months before the deadline. When he was brought on, all that had been solidly worked on was the idea that the singer had to be in the game and that someone would work on it. Nothing else. The plot hadn't been written, the cutscenes weren't together, they had no clue what they wanted to do with DT, and the other attacks hadn't even been worked on. Itsuno tried his best to make a competent product, but he was not happy with his assignment and was very disappointed in the game itself. He was so upset that he took it upon himself to direct DMC3 to make sure that this wasn't his legacy he left on the series. Not even just him though, everyone else on the team was stuck juggling multiple projects while not having real direction for this one, a story far too common for Capcom at this time. I knew the story of the game's development was bad, but I didn't realize how directionless it was, how screwed over the team was at every turn. It honestly makes it worse that this isn't the only time in the series this happened. DMC4 was infamously released unfinished, and in general, Capcom lets stuff like this happen often. This is essentially about on par with Mega Man 3's development cycle, and honestly, probably even worse. Again, reading that, it makes far more sense that this is the game we got. All the respect in the world to developers who tried their best in a bad situation. It honestly makes the product we got seem a lot more impressive. Nowhere near good, mind you, but the dedication on display is more than admirable. I'm glad stories like this seem to be getting less and less common, at least with Capcom and many other AAA developers. That's saying nothing of the other companies still running crap like this. Kind of depressing to think about. Devil May Cry 2 is genuinely one of the worst games I've ever played. It was worse than I ever could have thought it'd be. I went in and thought at worst it'd be a bit boring. Instead, it was painfully boring with a heavy dose of frustration added on. It is genuinely a downgrade in every single way. A horrible sequel, and removing it from the context of being a sequel to a great game, it's still a terrible standalone game on its own. The combat is broken, the presentation is undercooked at best, The story doesn't exist, and it seems to thoroughly misunderstand the appeal of an action game. At the very least, it being so inconsequential as an experience means that if you play these games one day, you can skip this one and miss nothing of value, which is exactly what I recommend you do. It's not even worth playing for a laugh. It's not fun bad, it's not so bad it's good, it's just a mess that you should absolutely avoid. 1 out of 10. An empty void of a game, and I hope not to be playing it again after this review is uploaded.